Ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to the earnings conference call to discuss JM Financial Limited's financial performance for the full year ended March 31, 2021. As a reminder, all participant lines will be in the listen-only mode, and there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions after the presentation concludes. Should you need assistance during the conference call, please signal an operator by pressing star then 0 on your touchtone phone. Please note that this conference is being recorded. I now hand the conference over to Mr. Vishal Kampani, Group Managing Director, JM Financial Limited. Thank you, and over to you, sir.
Thank you. On behalf of JM Financial, we extend a very warm welcome to all of you to our conference call of JM Financial Limited to discuss our financial results both for the fourth quarter and the full year ended FY21. I hope all of you have had a chance to go through our presentation, press release and results. They have been updated on the website and stock exchange. I'm joined by my entire senior management team here today. Before we open up for Q&A, I'd like to give you an update on the performance of our various businesses, and after which Manish will briefly take you through the financial numbers. Our consolidated revenue for financial year 21 stood at 3,227 crores, a decrease of 6.6% year on year. For the same period, our PAT stood at 590 crores, an increase of 8.3% year on year. Given the uncertainties around COVID-19, we have taken provisions across the group to the tune of 208 crores for FY21. Our adjusted PAT, pre-COVID impact after non-controlling interest, is at 689 crores for FY21. Moving on to the loan book details, our consolidated loan book is at 10,854 crores, down approximately 6% year on year. The wholesale mortgage book constitutes 65.9% of the loan book, approximately at 7,158 crores. The wholesale mortgage book registered a year-on-year degrowth of approximately 11%. The capital markets book constituted 6.8% of the loan book, which is approximately 735 crores. The capital markets has registered, a book has registered a year-on-year growth of close to 58%. Corporate lending book, which also includes the promoter financing book, that is approximately 19.4% of our loan book, is at 2,101 crores. This book has registered a year-on-year degrowth of 7.4%. The retail mortgages loan book constitutes approximately 6.8% of the loan book, which is at 744 crores. I'm happy to report that this book has registered a year-on-year growth of 29.6%. This loan book comprises of housing finance, small ticket loan against property and education institutions lending. The wealth LAP book, which is the cross-sell of loan against property to our IWS clients, it's small and constitutes around 1% of the total loan book. Moving on to asset quality, the gross NPA ratio of the lending business is at 3.5%, net NPA at 2%, and SMA2 is at 2.9% for March 31st, 2021. On leverage and liabilities, on a consolidated basis, our gross debt to equity is at 1.3 times as of March 31st, 21, and on a net basis at 0.7 times. During FY21, we raised 3,123 crores through long-term borrowings. We also concluded a QIP issuance, which you all are aware of, in June 2020. Our borrowing mix comprises of approximately 78% from long-term sources and 22% from short-term, as compared to 91% long-term and 9% short-term as of March 31st, 2020. Now I'll just touch upon the full year performance for our various business verticals. Let me start with the IWS segment. The segment had revenues of 1567 crores with a profit before tax of 446 crores. The IWS segment has contributed approximately 42% to our group's profit before tax, and profit after tax has increased by 6.4% year-on-year to 331 crores. Again, happy to report that the assets under management of our wealth management business are at 59,000 crores, excluding custody assets. The equity component has increased by 105.7% year-on-year to 20,892 crores. Also happy to report the assets under management of our newly commenced Elite Wealth business stands at 549 crores. The loan book for the IWS segment, which is largely capital markets and corporate lending, is at 3,200 crores, down approximately 17.4%. The gross debt equity for IWS group is at 1.4 times, and the net debt to equity is at 0.6 times for the same period. During the full year, we disbursed close to 85,000 crores towards IPO funding. Moving on to the second vertical, which is the mortgage lending business. The segment had revenues of 1,218 crores with a profit before tax of 478 crores. The business contributed approximately 45% to our group's profit before tax. PAT from this segment on a consolidated basis is at 165 crores. Our loan book remained flat at 7,650 crores. The gross debt equity for mortgage lending is at 1.5 times, and the net debt equity is at 0.9 times for the same period. Coming to the distressed credit business, our AUM reduced by 3.7% YOY to approximately 11,000 crores. JM Financial ARC's contribution to the ARC is at 3,193 crores, which is an increase of 6% year-on-year. The segment had revenues of 385 crores with a profit before tax of 91 crores. The business contributes 8.5% of the group PBT. PAT from this segment grew to 44%. The gross debt equity is at 1.35 times and net debt equity is at 1.26. Moving on to the asset management business comprising of our mutual fund. The revenues here are 31 crores with a loss before tax of 3.5 crores. The average quarterly AUM of the mutual funds is at 2,400 crores, comprising close to 600 crores in equity and 1,800 crores in debt schemes. With this brief update, I will now request Manish, our Group CFO, to present the group financials.
Thank you, Vishal. Good evening, everybody. Before I present financial, I would like to bring to your notice that any forward-looking statements made on this call are based on management's current expectations. However, actual result may vary significantly, and therefore the accuracy or completeness of this expectation cannot be guaranteed. Now let me take you through the group's results which were announced yesterday and are available on our website. In quarter 4 FY21, our revenue remained flat at 841 crores. The quarter 4 FY21 PBT is at 312 crores, which is a 45% increase year-on-year. And our quarter 4 FY21 PAT, profit after tax, increased by 35% from 131 crore to 177 crores. With regard to the full year numbers, the gross revenue is 3,227 crores and a net consolidated profit is rupees 590 crores. This represents EPS of 6.34 versus rupees 6.48 for the same period last year. As on March 31, 2021, the net worth is 6,947 crores, which is a book value of rupees 72.9 per share. With this, I would like to conclude and we are happy to take any questions. Over to moderator.
Thank you very much. We will now begin the question and answer session. Anyone who wishes to ask a question may press star and 1 on their touchtone telephone. If you wish to remove yourself from the question queue, you may press star and 2. Participants are requested to use handsets while asking a question. Ladies and gentlemen, we will wait for a moment while the question queue assembles. The first question is from the line of Kunal Shah from ICICI Securities. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question and hope everything's safe and fine with everyone at JM. So, firstly, in terms of the overall stress pool that's come up when we look at it in terms of GNPA plus SMA pool. So, in terms of the restructuring, how much would have gone into the restructured portfolio? And SMA2, what we highlighted in terms of the number of accounts, those have reduced to hardly 3 accounts now. So what has happened with the balance? Is it like the recovered one, it has maybe there was a backward flow into the, say, SMA1 or SMA0? If you can highlight that, yeah.
Sure, Kunal. Thanks for your concern. Times have been challenging. JM has had its own cases in terms of COVID, but we are managing to the best we can. It's a very difficult environment in terms of operating, and clearly we have to make sure that our people and the safety of our people comes first. Moving on to your question on NPA. So as I mentioned in my statement for the December quarter result, that there was a very clear feeling that we had peaked in terms of our NPA and SMA2, and I think that flows through with the efforts that the collections team has been working on, and we have reduced numbers on the SMA2 front. Even the adjustment into NPA is really the Supreme Court adjustment. 1.79% is really the Supreme Court adjustment. So we feel pretty comfortable where we are in terms of pre-COVID too, very comfortable of where we were in terms of our asset quality. Of course, there is going to be some impact because of COVID too, and we are really seeing the impact in the last 10 days. So to give you an example, sales have become slow, site visits have become slow. It's not just Maharashtra COVID; it's almost national COVID now. You know the numbers which have been impacted in Karnataka and Delhi and many of these markets where we lend. So we are watching the situation very closely. Having said that, I would be pleased to sort of say that I don't think that we should cross our NPA levels on the book over the next year of what we have seen in the December quarter. I would still like to maintain that that sort of are the peak numbers. But I would like to stress on one thing, that the recovery aspect from the court, SARFAESI action, NCLT, we are seeing a lot of slowdown in the recovery action. The recovery action is not going to be as seamless from a timeline perspective as we thought it would be last quarter, particularly because of the COVID wave 2. Across geographies, it's getting difficult in terms of timelines to be able to recover the money in time. Yes, we have seen dramatic improvement in SMA2. It is as I had mentioned, if you remember, even in the September call, that a lot of the problems that we saw with the developers were really logistics, sales. All that was sort of behind us, and as the sales numbers have improved and the cash flow numbers have improved, obviously the stress on the portfolio will reduce. So to give you an example, from all the way from October till March 31st, our average escrow collections have been in excess of 120 crores per month, and very happy to report that even in the month of April, on the real estate book, our collection was close to 118 crores. So, as late as 30th April, we still haven't seen a lot of impact. And one of the reasons is because our construction finance has been rolling on, our sites, have been operational and sales have been strong. Now, the slowdown in sales that we are going to see, we've already seen in April, in May, will have some level of impact on cash collection over the next few quarters. But still, largely, we feel confident because the runway which we got from October to March has been stupendous, which I think will keep cash flow running very strongly. So again, fingers crossed. I hope we can deliver, a decent outcome despite the challenges that we are seeing nationwide, on our book here.
Sure. Thanks. That was quite a comprehensive overview. So just few more things in terms of growth. We had seen wholesale mortgages. There was some uptick. So is it like, again, last time you highlighted that we would be evaluating the opportunity and it is towards that, or it is to the existing? So that's the first one. Then second, in terms of interest on interest reversals, given that our loans would be more than 2 crores, how much was the impact overall in the financials? And lastly, in terms of borrowing, there has been too much of a liquidity which we have almost like 5,000 crores plus cash and cash equivalent, and borrowing has also gone up quite substantially in Q4. So what's the reason for that? Is it more in terms of the growth, or it is more in terms of being slightly cautious because of second wave? Thanks. Yeah.
Sure. So I'll address the questions one by one. Let me address the last question. So we decided, as you're aware, we decided to start growing back in wholesale mortgages. So that is why we stepped up the borrowing program from January of last year. But what happens in wholesale mortgages and corporate lending particularly is that there is a 1 month to 3 month time period for diligence and for the transaction to go through. And we frankly had a lot of banks who've told us to draw down money on 31st March, right? And because we have long-term relationships with those banks, we've drawn down the money. And hopefully I'm expecting that we will be utilizing all of that money this quarter. And despite the challenges, I think we will be able to grow our book. Even last quarter, a substantial part of the rise in the loan book is new loans. And I think that will continue this quarter. Having said that, I must also say that a lot of our credits where the sales have been very strong. You are aware that, we are lending at around 14.5%, and we could lose some of those assets in terms of prepayments. Not all, few of those assets, where some of the other higher rated lenders may take some of our assets. So we will have new assets booked. We will show growth in book. But we may even lose some of the high performing assets. And frankly, that's a very good outcome, right? Because, it speaks, volumes of the asset quality that you have. That's number one. I did not answer the last question you asked me on OTR. So our OTR numbers are very low. Nishit, you can give him the numbers. I think they are on the OTR actual number is, I would imagine, less than 1% of book. But we have DCCO, and DCCO is around 19.7% of our book. So DCCO is nothing but like a restructuring only, which is basically given for the principal. And if you go back into your notes, all of our DCCO cases are post-COVID. So we really started applying DCCO only in April. And on that 19.7% book also, I think almost on most of that book, I would say almost 75% of that book, we have seen healthy sales. And we've seen very good recovery, and the cash flow position should improve, dramatically from the sales that have happened in the last 3 to 6 months. So I wouldn't be very concerned today about that book. But we have to watch, right? I mean, there is a wave 2, there could be a wave 3, so we have to plan very cautiously. Now on growth, what we feel is that there is, this time COVID is a bit different, right? One is, we're not expecting any national lockdown. Second, I think businesses, if you go back to April, May, June last year, they had some sort of a reset factor, right? They had to learn how to cope and deal with, a new viral disease called COVID, right? Now, even though the disease is more virulent and maybe a little more dangerous this time as compared to last time because it spread so fast and that's putting pressure on the healthcare system. Generally, when we talk to most businesses, they seem more confident about dealing with it and still progressing on the business front. So that makes us more confident, despite with what is going on, that we should still be able to, grow this year. So if I go back to the first quarter of this calendar year, the last quarter of last financial year, Jan, Feb, March, I think our targets for the wholesale mortgage book would have been somewhere 10,000 crores plus to end in FY22, March 22. I think we could probably reduce that target by around 10 to 12%, and we'll still try and see if we can hit at least a 9,000 crore wholesale mortgage book by March 22.
Sure, yeah. And interest on interest reversal?
Yes, so we are not really booked it in our financials. Nishit, you want to give the number on what the impact is? Nishit, money?
Interest, Vishal, Manish here. We have not booked, it was 18 crore, but 16 crore we have never booked, and 2 crore we have reversed in the month of March.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Thanks a lot and all the best, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. A reminder to the participants, anyone who wishes to ask a question may press star and 1 now. The next question is from the line of Anup Sharma from MK Investment. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is Anup Sharma from MK Investments. 3 questions, One is on the wholesale lending. We have spoken about consolidation in the segment, and in the same light, we are also seeing that what's our strategy in wholesale lending, especially the client selection strategy, how it has evolved?
Yeah, I think our strategy is quite simple. It's a very bottom-up driven strategy where we try and underwrite good loans and build a good portfolio. And we've never been very adventurous on debt equity, and have always curtailed our debt equity on the wholesale side. So we are again looking to grow it. The largest part of our portfolio in the wholesale side is mortgages and residential largely in nature. So we will look to grow it. Now on the consolidation, yes, there is a consolidation underway with the unlevered or lower leverage players in real estate gaining more market share. But there is also a larger consolidation that has happened among the financiers who finance these people. So I think, we are in good shape. It is only about being able to assess the risk well and, at the appropriate time, start growing your book, which is already started.
Thank you. Just on this same question, over the past year or so, we saw significant stress in the real estate portfolio across the country, across developers. Any change you envisage, any change in the way or our client selection strategy, especially given the past year or so?
Yeah, so see, as a strategy, we've always had a book which is sort of highly cash flow backed book, right? So even in wholesale mortgages at any point of time in the last 5-7 years, also 60-65%, 2/3 of our book has always been cash flow backed. In fact, if you see the composition of our book last year during COVID, we almost had 25% of our book which was against ready property with OC, because construction was completed in those projects and the loan numbers had come down quite dramatically, and we're sitting on enough collateral of ready property. I think the approach will be very similar. Only difference would be that we will be even more skewed towards cash flow backed projects. So I think the number of 60-65% could easily be as high as 85-90% going forward. So we will do lesser of land, we will do lesser of structured finance in real estate, and we will do more of the construction finance and the cash flow backed projects.
Thank you. And my second question was on the retail book. What has been the experience till date, the retail mortgage lending book, and how do we see the segment shaping up, especially given the cost of funding is we are amongst not the largest NBFCs. What is our moat in this segment?
Yeah, so let me first begin with a macro statement that we don't try to be large in any of the segments that we operate. We really want to be one of the best at what we do. We are in a risk business, so large doesn't really mean successful. On the retail business, I must say the experience has been fantastic. We are extremely pleased with the way the book has behaved. Even in the month of April, our collection efficiency is upwards of 96%. In March was 99%. The book has done very well. Last year we grew the book at almost 30%, and I think we'll grow the book this year again at 30%. And it's going to be a big focus area for us. And I think if any long-term investor looks out 3 to 4 years, he will see a significant retail affordable housing book built by JM. Moat is our brand, our distribution, our rating. Again, our central mode for all our risk businesses, how we manage risk. I think that will flow through the entire culture of our risk practice, will flow through into our affordable housing finance businesses. So yeah, we remain very committed, and we started the business just 3 years ago, and I think by next year we will cross an important milestone of 1,000 crores of retail assets. And also an interesting thing you should note is that all our housing finance assets are all below the size of 20 lakhs, right? So they are really granular, very, very retail, very small ticket, it's just a fab business to build.
Thank you. And my last question is on the AMC business. Now, we've been trying for some time to restructure the AMC business, and it's proven difficult. So any thoughts, any new strategies you are planning for the AMC to get it back on profit path?
Right. So, you're right. And we have hired a new CEO. We hired a new CIO last year in Satish, who's a great guy. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we couldn't do much. And you've seen generally, except for the last 6 weeks, you've literally seen the industry lose AUM. So obviously a smaller player like us in the industry would get impacted even more. But we've hired a new CEO. The announcement of the name will be made end of the month or first thing in June. And we are hoping that, we will have more energy with the new management team on board to turn around the business, specifically on the mutual fund side. On the AIF side, I think we're quite excited. We've almost completed investing our full private equity fund 2. We are on course to raise 1,000 crore plus private equity fund 3 this year. We've closed, despite COVID, we've closed our credit fund 1. We could not market it internationally because of COVID, because travel was restricted. Otherwise, that fund would have closed definitely above 500 crores. But this year we will do a real estate fund, largely for land finance, and we will also do, as I said, a private equity fund 2. And we hope to complete investing our distressed credit fund this year. And once travel opens up, I think we will go and market a distressed credit fund globally, which will be 2. So the second fund, I mean. So I think we remain very committed. Our AIF business has done well. It is growing. We are seeding the business, and therefore you are not seeing profitability from it. The same thing will happen in the mutual fund business once the new CEO is on board. We hope that over the next 3 to 4 years, we can turn around this business and make it successful.
All right, Vishal. Thank you so much. Wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Manan Tijoriwala from ICICI Prudential Asset Management. Please go ahead.
Hi, sir. I had a couple of questions. First, I read that the housing finance company stake is being bought in by the Credit Solutions company. So what specifically is the genesis for that?
Yeah. So let me give you a brief history. So we've so far invested 150 crores of capital in the housing finance company. And we are sitting with a hell of a lot of surplus cash in the mortgage lending business, the wholesale business, which is all done through JM Financial Credit Solutions, where we own 46% and our partners own 54%. And we believe that the growth rates of the wholesale mortgage business that we have planned, does not require the excess capital that we are sitting on today, because we've had a fantastic last 7-8 months, right? We've got tremendous amount of cash flow. Just in the last 7-8 months, we've got over 900 to 1,000 crores of cash collected. So the idea was that how do we bring the two mortgages businesses closer, and how do we utilize this capital more efficiently? And therefore, we have given an option to Credit Solutions before September 30th to invest 490 crores in a housing finance company and take the capital from 150 crores right up to 650 crores odd. So it becomes a highly well capitalized retail HFC. We've been, we are, as a group, we are very strong, but when the standalone balance sheet, for example, goes to a bank or goes to an insurance company, we face restrictions like, we'd love to give you more money, but, we can't give you more than 30% of your net worth. So people get capped on the loan side, right? So 150 crores means a lot of the banks won't lend more than 40-50 crores to us. So once we increase the net worth to almost 650-700 crores, that opens up a much larger liability base for us, which will enable us to continue on our 30-35% plus growth rate comfortably over the next 4 to 5 years in the retail housing finance business.
Right, sir. Second question, I saw that there is a largest exposure that you've taken on Piramal. So what would be the tenor, yield, or any sort of color that you could provide on what project is this for?
No, we cannot provide the tenor and yield and the details of that, but it's a highly secured exposure by real estate collateral. They do have some prepayment options. Obviously, as you would understand that, our rates would be higher than where Piramal would normally borrow. So there could be a part of that loan getting prepaid from the original tenor of the loan that we've given them.
Okay. So one last question. I'll join back in the queue later. Is there any realistic assumptions on what sort of gearing would you be able to achieve in the products and Credit Solutions book in the near to medium term?
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of perspective, and you can backwards work out where our gearing would be. So I think we'll target probably a 9,000 crore gross loan book, total loan book for Credit Solutions by March 22. And we want to target close to between 4,000 and 4,500 for JM Financial Products. So based on the current net worth, you can simply calculate the profitability, and you can see where the debt equity will pan out. But simply put, again, it's because of our profitability, which is coming from the IWS segment, is so strong that on a console level, it barely impacts us. Even if we go to a 10,000 or 11,000 crore loan book, or even a 5 or 6,000 crore loan book in products, debt equity is not a concern for us at all.
Sure, makes sense. Thank you.
So right now we are sitting on so much cash that we have more than literally a year's liabilities, which we can pay down today. So there is no concern on debt equity or liquidity. It's really choosing the right credits and being able to punch through growth. And we were all very excited, but now we have to obviously be a little cautious because of COVID-2 and perhaps a COVID-3. But the endeavor is, and the challenge to our management team is that how do we successfully grow even through this environment? And that's the challenge we've taken as a management team this year.
Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you. A reminder to the participants, anyone who wishes to ask a question may press star and 1 now. The next question is from the line of Dhruvesh Sanghvi from Prospero Tree. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I have a couple of questions related to the IWS division.
Sure.
On the investment banking side, if you can throw some light that, okay, what were we in terms of our standing in, let's say, 2015 or 16, a couple of years back, and how has it been shaped today? Is it increasing market share, increasing more deals, or some perspective on that area, because these numbers becomes very difficult to understand from an outsider's perspective. Second is on the retail broking. considering that discount brokerage is taking a huge steam, and we were fairly behind otherwise also in the retail broking expansion, and you had said that you are looking to expand through the franchisee route. So some updates, and how do you see that business and what is happening in there? The third is, would you like to answer here, or should I just complete the broad questions first?
No, go on.
Yeah. Third is on the wealth division. Is there, how do we differentiate? Because there are already 4 or 5 decent sized wealth business providers like IIFL, Kotak, and many others are joining. And we have done very well. But is it just that the market opportunity is expanding so much that everybody has been able to capture a lot out of it? Or, for example, I saw that you have opened in Bangalore a special team. What different things are we doing there, and how well can that things last for you? Because everybody will copy, and it's a very easy thing to copy is what we understand.
Right.
And the other part is on lending. I will come back, but let us complete this IWS. Yes.
Sure. All good questions. So investment banking, I think we are in I would say a pole position. The business has done exceedingly well. And from 2015 to now, I think we are only in a stronger position. I think we clearly would be in the top, 2 to 4 banks, which most capital issuers will think of on the equity side. And now we are getting there slowly also on the fixed income side. We've already entered the top 10 club. On M&A, we remain as the top 2 in terms of recall. In private equity, again, we remain in top 5 in terms of recall. So I think the franchise is very, very strong. I also want to add again that, our pipeline is very strong. It was very strong in September. It was very strong last March. And all I can tell you is that our pipeline right now is even more stronger in terms of the number of mandates we have, whether it goes across M&A, it goes across restructuring, private equity, or even IPOs and capital raises. So I think with the current liquidity in the market and where the capital markets are booming globally, I would not be surprised if 2021-22 is even a bigger year compared to 2019-20 and 2021. On discount broking, I think we are not a discount broker, right? We've always been more of a HNI broker, and we are definitely in the game in terms of retail broking, and we are expanding it through franchisee network. The discount broking market already has their 4 or 5 players who are quite well established. It is our decision whether we want to burn and try and compete with them, or the other decision is let them go and expand the market. We will use more of digital marketing. We will use more advice-based products, more research, and we will capture some of their cream customers over time. So, it is a very, very niche in broking. You have to choose your spot and choose your model. So, we are very good in research-based broking. We are very good in lending, margin trade funding-based broking, right? We are very good at block trading. So these are some of the businesses in broking that we have a very good market share, and our brand equity is very strong. Discount broking today, to try and become number 1 or number 2, I think, we will be living in fool's paradise to think that we can actually get there.
No, I was not hinting that. I was just asking from a positioning perspective, what are your thoughts on where we will be and where the industry is going?
I think we are very happy that the top 3 or 4 players there are expanding the market, because ultimately they are bringing in more and more customers in the stock market, right?
Right.
And that market will help us, to gain market share over time with the products that we offer. So we may not have a great discount broking strategy, but we are building on our digital marketing strategy. As I said, almost 6 months ago, the work has already begun. And, clearly it takes at least a year to get sort of established. We are expanding on the franchisees, but what is happening is because of COVID and travel related restrictions, it's not easy to travel to cities, sit with the franchisee, convince him of why he should choose JM, and how he should work with us. So obviously, just the way we've not lost many franchisees, we've not been able to gain too many franchisees because of times of COVID. The accounts are sticking to where they are right now. But I think that will change. Also, I think I mentioned this in one of my earlier calls also, that in the non-discount broking business, market share is going to consolidate a lot over the next decade or so, right? So I think that is also a very big opportunity for around 10 players. So today it's almost a 100-player market, and I think in 10 years from now it's going to be a 10-player market. So even though the discount share in the broking is going up, the market share of some of the large brokers over the next 10 years is going to go up even more in the non-discount side. And who knows, a couple of years later, there could be mergers between players like us and some of the discount brokers. Like, no one knows, right? Morgan Stanley actually bought E-Trade last year. I'm sure you read that.
Yeah.
So who knows here? But we're not ignoring the space. We are very careful. We are watching it. But our strategy is to play on our strengths and not go and burn money and go crazy and do something where we're just trying to compete for the heck of competition without having an eye on cash flow.
Fair enough. On the wealth.
Yeah, so wealth, I think, is an extremely strong and powerful proposition for us. You have already seen that in the numbers over the last 2-3 years. We've expanded teams. We've expanded our integration very strongly with our investment bank and wealth. And we are going to do that even more over the next 2 years, specifically when it comes to the ultra high net worth customers. Our Bangalore launch specifically has been to capture the technology companies and a lot of these sort of elite wealth, which are sort of 100 crore and less disposable investments, where they can actually put 100 crores in securities market in terms of investment. So I think that is a very good effort. It is still small, but it's going to grow very fast. We've hired a lot of people in elite wealth. You would have seen the numbers. We're almost 50 plus now. And that in terms of our distribution, in terms of number of people, will grow a lot faster compared to the private wealth. Private wealth will focus on larger wealth families, somewhere between 100 crores all the way to 1,000 crores. And of course, our mainstay business is the ultra HNI customer, which we are very well poised to service, because our entire investment bank is the backbone of servicing the ultra high net worth customer, who has a surplus of almost 1,000 crores, which he can invest in the securities market. So I think we have clearly defined the three segments that we want to go behind. The private wealth and elite wealth segments will be highly integrated both into our broking business as well as our investment banking business, and the ultra high net worth business will be highly integrated into our investment bank as well as our institutional equities business as well as our lending book. So I think our strategy is very clear. We are just executing, and hopefully, fingers crossed, quarter on quarter, you'll see the numbers going up, and as our AUMs go up, with a lag, profitability will come very strongly.
Great. Can I ask about the lending piece, or should I join back with you?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. On the lending side, the kind of clarity that emerges always when we speak or hear about IWS, the lending out of the struggles of the industry and extreme abundant caution that JM has, that sometimes we internally think that we are far, far, far more conservative than we should be as investors of JM. I'm applauding as well, saying that, sometimes that attitude may be hurting us as investors. And the strategy also doesn't come out so clearly, because on and off, there could be some interviews where you talk about a potential banking license application, where you say that you are open to the corporate lending area, but our expertise is only towards mortgages. Can you broadly clear out some thoughts that, suppose if we are thinking from JM's perspective over 5-6 years, with whatever information is available today at hand, how should we think about JM's journey in the lending business apart from what it is doing today?
Surely. So first, let me address one of the points that you raised. I think we have a lot of expertise in corporate lending. So it's not just the wholesale mortgages piece. We understand the corporate lending and the promoter lending piece extremely well. But what happens is, again, as you rightly said, that we are conservative, and we will not basically lend to the riskier side of corporates, and therefore, when your cost of borrowing is elevated, and that's exactly what happened through IL&FS and COVID, we basically put a lid on corporate borrowing. See, real estate lending happens around 14.5 to 15%, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But the corporate lending happens at around 12%, right? 12.5%. And the capital market lending happens at 10, right? So there is a very clear 250 basis points difference in each of these asset categories. So therefore, from a risk-adjusted perspective, and when I mean risk-adjusted, assuming that the rating levels on risk are more or less the same, it is obviously better from a book perspective.
Hello, I'm not able to hear. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Vishal is muted out. I think Vishal has got dropped out. Just wait for a minute, he will join back.
No worries. I thought my phone was under some complication.
Please stay connected while we connect Mr. Kampani back in the call. Thank you for patiently waiting. We have Mr. Kampani reconnected, so you can go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I got disconnected. I think when I was trying to explain the risk-adjusted return between the various asset classes. So as I was saying, that the risk-adjusted return is obviously going to be higher in wholesale mortgages, but there is always a challenge in terms of being able to execute on your plans, particularly with COVID, because of physical diligence and those kind of issues. And plus, we wanted to make sure last year, same time, that construction finance continues and that we're actually able to generate cash flow from the book.
Sorry to interrupt. I get that, but let me just repeat the question because there was a passage of time which got lost, so maybe you may want to add there. So I was talking about that, when we hear things from the lending area, that you may also like to get into the banking area if the RBI, permits and the time comes. And at this point in time, we are into one or two segments of corporate lending. So how does this merge over a 4 or 5 year period, especially when mortgage lending is not offering such lucrative opportunities? So in combination of growth, investors' interest, how does this take care over a 5-7 years? And of course, it's a volatile market, but whatever is your best guess.
No, first of all, I don't think mortgage lending doesn't offer attractive opportunities. It is how fast and how you want to grow. So I think it offers more than enough attractive opportunities. I think from a banking license perspective, I've always maintained transparently that, of course, we'd like to be a bank at some point. And if we have to grow the lending business and make it larger over time and make it more diverse over time, it is very important to have a fantastic liability franchise and a fantastic cross-selling franchise, which is best built in a bank. But frankly, we don't know how RBI is thinking about it and, what their, new guidelines will be for, private sector groups as well as corporate groups to apply for a bank license. And third, what their philosophy is going to be on promoters' role versus promoters' involvement versus promoters' holding. So, once we have clarity on all those aspects, that is when we decide whether, we become a bank or we don't become a bank. See, as an NBFC, again, I've always maintained that you can't be everything to everyone, right? Every NBFC specializes in a few things in their initial avatar, and they slowly grow to become more diversified, right? So, and that's what happens. We started off as a capital market lender. We picked the real estate space, we picked the corporate space, now we've picked the retail mortgages space. And there is a 3 to 5 year sort of understanding period, and then you see a good 7 to 10 year growth rate in that asset class. But when you're a bank, things are very different. The customer acquisition is very different, and the kind of products you can design and sell through a banking system is very different from a plain vanilla NBFC. So, let's see. I mean, we don't know. I mean, our intention is, yes, lending business becoming a bank makes sense, but the guidelines have to be sort of attractive and appealing enough from a long-term perspective for us to convert.
Fair enough. I'll join back the queue. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Akhil Bipin Thakkar from Axis Mutual Fund. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for taking my question. I have one question. I wanted some color on your DCCO book. So basically here I wanted to understand what is the kind of status of this book in terms of other accounts under moratorium, or they are matured assets where this DCCO was offered. Two, how has the performance of the book been post giving them this DCCO? Were there any additional funding that was offered to them as a part of this DCCO? And will this entire book be under real estate, or is it also considered your educational institution financing book? And lastly, I wanted to understand whether this is this the peak of your restructuring / DCCO, or we could see more with the second wave of COVID coming up?
Yeah, so all good questions. Let me just give a backdrop, and then Gitanjali can answer the details in the rest of it. So all of our book is in DCCO. We are referring to the Emergency Credit Guarantee Scheme funding. That, yes, we have utilized some part of it for education institution loan book. Manish will have the answer on what the amount is, but it's not very significant. And most of our DCCO is for actually projects which were under construction and actually selling. So it is only an adjustment because of COVID, where the principal had to be pushed out by 6 months to 12 months to 18 months in certain cases. And I would imagine, as I said earlier, that almost 70-80% of the book has performed pretty decently. Manish, you want to give the number on the emergency funding that we've done for the education institution loan, and followed by that, Gitanjali, you can answer the question on DCCO more granularly, please.
Yeah, so Vishal, yeah. So on emergency ECLGS, we have used that for our schools financing business, education institutional lending business. Our portfolio is around 100 schools and the portfolio is 200 crores. We have sanctioned the loan worth to 20 crore and which has been utilized for them. And as on 31st of March, it is 100% kind of collection efficiency. We don't have any NPA, not even SMA1, SMA2 accounts.
Okay. So you're saying, sorry, just for my clarification, 20 crores out of 200 crores you had extended the ECLGS to them?
Correct, absolutely right.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Gitanjali. So just to take the question you asked on DCCO, so one, with regards to the DCCO, it's entirely on the real estate book. As such, this provision is only allowed for corporate real estate, commercial real estate as is defined by RBI. So this is entirely on the real estate book. With regards to where these have been applied, so these have been applied to our under construction projects across geographies. Now, most of our under construction projects have been in the middle to advanced stages. So some bit of that would be in last mile, some bit of that would be in a middle to medium range in terms of completion, but not too many of them are in the nascent stages, if that's what the question was. Also, a good point to refer here is that the collections which Vishal spoke about earlier, with an average of upwards of 120 crores every month. Now, if I have to consider that these collections in our escrow accounts are about 40% of the overall collections. So we are talking about these projects, part of which are obviously DCCO projects, would be approximately to the range of 300 to 350 crores on a monthly basis collection. So last 6 months, all our under construction projects and part of our LAP portfolio have actually seen tremendous collections. And this is not 1 month or 2 months. This is consistently being performed for the last 6 months since October of 2020. So fair bit of the portfolio which was given the DCCO benefit, because of the collections that have come in and the massive sales that have happened thanks to the benefit of the stamp duty in some of the geographies, and I think the general change in the sentiment of the buyer that the bottom kind of, as far as the pricing is concerned, has been reached. We have seen a lot of end user demand come back. So if that broadly answers the question and also gives you some perspective of how much collections have happened on this kind of portfolio.
Only last two bits here, maybe follow-up question. One, is there any of your DCCO which has actually fallen into SMA2 or maybe GNPA? And second one, is this the peak of your restructuring, or do we expect more to come in with the new guidelines or any kind of restructuring to be done on your book going forward?
So the answer to the first question is no. Most of the cases where we have done a DCCO, that particular loan is in the standard book. Now, with regards to the full analysis which we have done on the portfolio, we did seem that any further DCCO might seem unlikely on the portfolio. However, like Vishal caveated, we are still watching the situation of the second wave very closely. And if there is a certain amount of extension in terms of how quickly this gets resolved or doesn't get resolved, we might have to reevaluate the situation. But as of what we saw before the second wave, we think it was highly unlikely that any further portfolio would need a DCCO.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vishal.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Shubhranshu Mishra from Systematix. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity, sir. And it's been a detailed discussion till now. When I look at the slide number 28, which gives all the organization structures, fairly complex. So any thoughts on actually simplifying this? Because it's got a lot of subsidiaries here. And the second order point is that given the fact that we are pretty much spread out doing almost everything from wealth management to private wealth management to credit to ARC. Have we made a serious representation to RBI in order to form a bank, or is there a board level discussion at least for a roadmap to be a bank? So that's the first question. The second question is on the private wealth. You have given out the assets under advice. What I wanted to understand is the yield that we have in the present fiscal year versus the last fiscal year, and the number of private wealth advisors. What is the average vintage of these 47 private wealth advisors? Those are my three questions. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I think Ajay Mishra, you can answer the questions on the wealth advisory front. I think at the board level, of course, there is no specific discussion whether we need to be a bank or we don't need to be a bank. It all depends on what RBI comes up with. So as I said, that if RBI is going to welcome private sector to start banks and allow promoters to in some way at least run them, be involved and have high shareholding, then of course we will be very interested. But the discussion is only going to be at a point when we know and we are clear on what it means for us to become a bank. Yes, we are on the structure of JM Financial. So yes, we are trying to rationalize a few subsidiaries at the right time. But having said that, we have to keep these businesses the way they are, because if you see, ARC requires a certain license, mutual fund business requires a separate license, broking requires a separate license. Then we have traditionally HFC has to be separate from the wholesale mortgages, because if we combine the two, then we cannot have 50% of our portfolio being retail because our wholesale mortgage portfolio is larger. So I think it is really because of regulatory reasons that some part of our organization structure is complex. But yes, you make a good point, and we are discussing internally and with the board on how we can rationalize and reduce the number of subsidiaries there. Ajay, you want to answer?
Have you made a representation to RBI for a banking license yet?
No, we haven't, because it is too early. See, RBI has of course asked for comments and thoughts and all of that, but they need to come out with clear guidelines, which they have said they will. So we have to await some of the directions. I think right now, if you can understand that most of the countries, regulators will be very concerned about COVID and the macro impacts, right? So I don't think any of these thoughts are really a priority for any Reserve Bank anywhere in the world, and I would sort of think that this is at least 6 months to a year away from any serious consideration from any serious regulator.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Ajay, you want to answer the question on wealth management, please?
Yeah, sure. So we are currently about 50 advisors, and the average vintage, we usually look at advisors who are senior with experience, and the average vintage is about 12 years. So we have a fairly stable team, and our overall assets are about close to 59,000 crores, where we've seen a 31% growth over the last 1 year. Our average yield was another question that you had asked, would be about 11 to 12 basis points. However, this may not necessarily represent the entire revenue, as we leverage on the overall group spends, and there is a lot of cross-selling that we do to our investment banking or fixed income or institutional equities group. And to answer your question.
So what will be the blended yield? Because 11 to 12 bits on a private wealth sounds very low, if my understanding is correct.
Yeah, there are a lot of businesses that, we do internally. So, this is purely on the wealth book. And then there would be a lot of other cross-selling, which is the entire essence of, IWS Group.
Okay. So how much would that be additional to 11, 12 bits? Is there a ballpark number that we can come up with, or it's slightly a difficult calculation?
No, that's something that, we'll have to work and come back to you on as,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Manan Tijoriwala from ICICI Prudential Asset Management. Please go ahead.
Hi, sir. A couple of follow-up questions. So first, just a clarification on the 200 crore education institution book. So have we done ECLGS on 20 crore or off 20 crore?
Manish, you want to answer that?
Off 20 crore.
Okay, so 20 crore has been disbursed under ECLGS scheme.
On the retail mortgage side.
Okay, sure.
Cool.
Yeah. And so how much cash from the QIP would be held at the holdco as on date, and any indication of how will that be allocated?
Yeah, it is all in liquid mutual funds, and all of the 770 crores is the cash still lying in the holding company.
Right. Okay. And so any color on the portfolio performance on the corporate finance segment, which would consist of structures such as LAS or structured finance or corporate finance?
Yeah, so that portfolio has done pretty decently, and there's more than adequate provisions on the same. Of course, because of the disruptions of COVID last year, specifically in the first 2 quarters, many of those companies, one specifically in Autocomp, one was in the agri and food supply chain, and they faced some level of disruption. But very happy to note that both those businesses have come back quite nicely, quite strongly. In fact, the food and agri company is able to increase its EBITDA substantially, and the other Autocomp company business also has come back almost to normalcy. So I think the portfolio is quite healthy and strong right now.
Right, sir. This is the last question. Of the total surplus cash of 5,000 plus crores, have you been able to deploy any of it in April, or are you looking at a close enough timeline to reduce on that?
So we have certain deals which are under diligence, and certain deals where we are negotiating on the capital markets corporate side. So we are hoping that we can deploy it. April, if you see, historically has always been a month of underperformance for us. A couple of reasons why is because there is fatigue of March 31st, which happens, and there is a lot of management time that is going into business planning and preparing, at least in the first 15-20 days of April. So I wouldn't say that we've deployed any of this cash towards transactions, but I'm hoping that in May and June we should be able to deploy some part of it.
Right, sir. Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from the line of Dhruvesh Sanghvi from Prospero Tree. Please go ahead.
Yeah. One question on the ARC side. It's a slightly difficult entity to understand, and because there are a little less questions today, can I ask you to slightly expand the conversation on the ARC opportunities and the learnings of the last 5 years? Because mainly things have got delayed in terms of time, and therefore IRRs have been affected. I mean, this is one message that I keep sensing. Can you expand in a couple of minutes on that, please?
Sure. So I'll have our CEO Anil Bhatia do the same. Anil, can you go ahead and expand?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hi. Interesting question. See, basically, the thing is, you asked our experience for the last 5 years. See, what has happened is that obviously after NCLT has come in, while it has been good for the industry, for the entire banking industry and ARC industry, there have been some delays also. Okay. And if you ask me my experience, the threat of NCLT has yielded better results, okay, for all the lenders than the actual NCLT process, and there have been delays. Okay. Having said that, one thing is very clear that the borrowers know for sure today. Earlier in the good old days, they knew that they will keep fighting legally or they will keep trying to, loot the system. Okay. Now they very clearly know they will lose their company, they will lose everything. So, to that extent, there is a discipline, there is a seriousness from the borrower's perspective to close. In terms of business, what we have realized is good quality business, and that has been our focus from the very initial days. Good quality business, good asset-based business, having weak and bad balance sheet, that is something which will always yield results. And this is what we have seen, okay, in our portfolio in the last 7-8 years. Okay, all the assets which have good quality, okay, eventually they pay off. Okay, it's a question of delays in some cases, but eventually they pay off. Okay, and that is what is very important. Second other aspect is that the cost of acquisition. Cost of acquisition is something, or the structure of acquisition is something which has to be very rightly put. If the cost is slightly on the higher side, because of the underlying asset value, the structure has to be very right from an ARC's perspective to make a great return on those assets. Anything else you was in the question? Because it was a fairly...
Right, yeah, it was an open-ended question. So a little bit more specific area here is that, as you said, that the NCLT coming in, the threat of NCLT has yielded better results than really people going into NCLT and converting an outcome. But does it not decrease our opportunity size, or how upbeat are we today about this business and the opportunities? Of course, I mean, I'm talking post-pandemic, post-COVID area, let's say 1.5 years ahead. Will it reduce the set of opportunities? Because, not many people are interested in getting into ARC, and the headlines have almost dulled out completely in that area, making me feel that, okay, the returns doesn't seem to be lucrative for most people out there.
So I think opportunities are there, opportunities will remain. Okay. If you remember, or if you have noticed, we acquired one large asset from NCLT itself, okay, and turned it around with a strategic investor. So an opportunity for ARCs have been there, today also are there, and will remain always. It's a question of who wants to enter this business, okay, and it's a patient business with a long-term patient capital. Other thing is that what has happened in the last 2 years, just to clarify further, is that thanks to the NBFC-related problems and credit mutual funds-related problems, the liability side started becoming a challenge for most of the borrowers, including ARCs. Okay, so the way to grow this business is through strategic investors, co-investors, and through alternative funds. It cannot be grown systematically on a balance sheet, purely on the balance sheet.
Okay.
Our view is this is a great long-term business, provided your acquisitions are, well structured and at a great, and the costing of the acquisition is the control.
Right. And one slightly short-term question here again, that as we are very conservative, we always try to be very conservative on the balance sheet front. Are there any upside surprises possible, big, large upside surprises possible from our existing portfolio in the ARC? If you can name, it can be great. If you cannot, at least a hint on that can be helpful.
I would not be able to name and I will not be able to quantify the same, but all I can say is we have, in quite a few cases, we have converted unsustainable debt into equity, and that equity valuation is not captured in any of our fair valuation or any of our P&Ls. Okay. So in future, the underlying businesses have a good equity valuation, and all this equity valuation is almost at zero cost because it's an unsustainable debt conversion. So in future, these valuations can, bring in an upside. Okay, but I'm sorry, I'll neither be able to name the accounts nor will I be able to give the quantification. Other thing I would like to say is that there are certain accounts where we have acquired at a very, very low cost. Okay, but we have a substantial share. I have no problem in naming this. We are the second largest lender in the account called Kingfisher. We have already recovered more than recovered our entire investments, and today we are literally holding it at zero cost or very negligible cost. And sooner or later, there would be a huge amount of recovery in that account also. Okay, but these are not captured because they cannot be captured today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. As there are no further questions, I would now like to hand the conference over to Mr. Vishal Kampani for closing comments.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending our call. I hope all of you keep safe and take utmost care in the current COVID scenario. And thank you again, and look forward to seeing you all again, in our September quarter results. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of JM Financial Limited, that concludes this conference. Thank you for joining us, and you may now disconnect your lines.